Hi. Sometimes what you say in teaching practice feedback is only as important as how you say it. This is the talk that I gave at IATEFL this year. I'm Jo Gakonga and this is teacherfeedback.org. I think when we're in teaching practice feedback, it's a very vulnerable space. A friend of mine once said to me that it can be like clubbing seals. People come, they lay out their souls, and you have to be quite careful how you treat them, I think. So I wanted to look at this a little bit and to use politeness theory to try and help us to think about how we can make the situation better for trainees. Let's start by having a look at a bit of theory. So in 1987, 30 years ago, Penelope Brown and Stephen Levinson published a book called Politeness, Some Universals in Language Use. Now, obviously this is quite an old text now, and there have been quite a lot of developments in politeness theory since then, and there's some controversy about some of Brown and Levinson's claims. But even so, it remains pretty seminal, and I think that the framework that it sets out is quite interesting, so that's why I wanted to look at it. So a central concept in politeness theory is face and face-threatening acts, and this terminology is used in exactly the way that you might expect it to be. So things that people say that might make you feel uncomfortable or unhappy are face-threatening acts, and generally in our interactions with people we tend to try and cooperate actually to minimise these. Now, of course, face-threatening acts can be more or less severe, can have more or less weight to them, and this will depend on three main factors. So the first two of these are a function of the relationship between the two people. If there's a large power differential, then this will affect what each of them can ask or tell each other. So, for example, asking my sister if I can borrow some money is much less face-threatening than asking my boss the same question. The second thing that affects the weight of a face-threatening act is the distance between two people. So if people have a close relationship or see each other very regularly, then this tends to reduce the weight of a face-threatening act. And then, of course, the third aspect that will affect how face-threatening a speech act is the ranking of the imposition. So how big a threat does this pose to a person's face? So, for example, asking someone to pass you the salt isn't very face-threatening, but asking for a pay rise probably is. So teaching practice feedback, in fact feedback of any description, is inherently face-threatening. The very nature of it means that on some level it's critical. But it's different to other interactions because there's a kind of an unspoken agreement that this is what's going to happen. Trainees often have a strong desire to hear what they did wrong so they can improve. The problem can be that if this is delivered too directly, it can be really upsetting. And if people feel upset, then they're not usually able to take feedback on board very well because they can't hear it. They're too busy being defensive, yeah? So it seems to me there's a decline here. On one end of this, you can make feedback really kind and gentle so that you don't upset anyone, and that's clearly good. But if you go too far that way, then they might not be able to hear or understand what you're trying to say because it's wrapped up in too much cotton wool. And on the other end of the scale, with a big hammer, you can be really clear and direct, but you might end up with them crying in a corner, and that tends not to be a great way to take feedback on board either. So, to go back to Brown and Levinson, I haven't completely forgotten about them. They talk about two types of face. So they say that the first type of face is your negative face. And this is the part of you that doesn't want anyone to impose on you or tell you what to do. So it's the part of you that wants to be free. And the sort of things that threaten this are requests, suggestions, advice. So you can probably see the application of this to teaching practice feedback. And then the second kind of face is your positive face. And this is the part of you that wants to be liked, that wants to be part of the group. So any kind of criticism is going to threaten this. So basically we all want to be free and we all want to be liked. And anything that threatens either of those two aspects of our face has the potential to be upsetting. So that's the theory. Let's see what we can do to put that into practice and make it useful in terms of teaching practice. So thinking about what we've seen, Your negative face is your desire not to be imposed upon. And so negative politeness strategies are ones which will help trainees not to feel as if you're telling them what to do. And your positive face is the one that means you want to be liked. So positive politeness strategies are ones which will help trainees to feel part of the group and approved of. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can do this. Functions, let's look at that first. So being indirect, for example, if you're less direct about something, that helps with people's negative face because it's not so imposing. Similarly, offering choices helps with a negative face. You could do this or that, for example. Being friendly, on the other hand, would address people's positive face, and hopefully that's something that most of us would do anyway. And expressing approval, you need to give them some praise and make it specific so they know that you really did watch and you're not just saying, yeah, it was great. So that, of course, addresses your positive face again. Perhaps what's more useful to look at is the language choices that we can use for this. So, for example, using modals for low obligation, not you must or you should, but you could or you might. These would address that issue of not imposing on people. Avoiding imperatives. If you tell people what to do this, do that, then that's obviously quite an imposition. So you might want to avoid this. Now, I'm not saying do this all the time. I'm just saying that's a way of being more polite. So modulating your assertiveness. You're in a position of power because you're the trainer, but you don't have to be too assertive, perhaps. So perhaps a bit. I tend to use a bit a lot. You could do this a bit, or perhaps you could do that. So modulating your assertiveness again affects that negative face. It stops it being so imposing. Asking questions rather than making statements is another way of addressing negative face. On the other hand, ways of addressing positive face are things like including an inclusive we. So we as teachers, blah, blah, blah. Including them in that group of teachers, even though they're not quite there yet. Avoiding past modals. This is a really great one. It's a very easy linguistic trick. Rather than you could have done this, which implies a criticism, you could do this, which implies a choice. So this is avoiding criticism, it's addressing your positive face. And it's very easy to do. Contrastive conjunctions, the buts and the howevers. You did this really well, but blah, blah, blah. The only thing people hear is what comes after the but. In fact, what they hear is the but. So you can avoid this just by making it into two sentences. You did this really well. Next time, blah, blah, blah. So that might be a way of addressing positive face and giving approval again. Or avoiding disapproval at least. Describing what happened in neutral terms. So when this happened, this is what you did. Rather than, and maybe not why either, but, can you tell me about this? Again, avoiding disapproval. Expressing empathy. I think, it's hard to do this and people do need you to be a bit empathetic. So again, I think this is an approval thing. It's a solidarity thing. Let's have a look at an example. This is a short extract of some teaching practice feedback. It's not mine, but it is authentic. Have a look, stop me for a minute and have a look and see where you can see examples of politeness, positive or negative. Hopefully you've had a bit of a look at that. Here are some of the things that I think show a positive politeness. So we've got at the beginning here, again, you show confidence and encouraging manner. And there was a lot less teacher talk today too. So where you've got expressions of an ongoing relationship, you're including them in that group, you're showing them that you remembered what happened before and that you're paying attention to them. I think those are positive politeness strategies. Obviously compliments like confidence and encouraging manner, it's so great. Things like, I know it can be difficult, empathy. The students definitely benefited from this lesson, so praise and approval is helpful. Negative politeness might be things like this. I think next time you do this lesson, so I think you're modulating it. Next time you do this lesson, giving them the possibility of a further chance at this. You could, not you should. Brief warm-up activity, it's modulating it again. This would save you a great deal of time if you did this second conditionals, making it a possibility rather than a necessity. This is worth keeping an eye on. So all of these things that allow people choice. Now you might be thinking, I'm really confused by all this negative and positive politeness strategy stuff, and does it really matter? And I think for me, the sort of big takeaway from this is that it doesn't really matter how you analyse this so much, but it's useful to think of different ways in which you can make your feedback less aggressive, more palatable, easier for people to take on board. Of course, this is going to depend hugely on the person you are and the person they are and the situation and all sorts of other things. And I'm not saying that you should always do all of these things at all, but perhaps some of them are helpful to think about sometimes and might give you a framework for considering what you say and what you write in feedback. I hope that that's been a little bit helpful and has given you some food for thought. I'd really appreciate your comments below. Please do write something, send me some comments and let me know that I'm not here on my own. Thanks very much. Bye bye.